Hello everyone, this is Joshua Smith of Apollo's Artifacts. It is almost September of 2019. Instead of dividing this one up, I'm going to go ahead and cover 4 different articles on Jeffrey Epstein of some rather stunning information that has come out in the last couple of days. The first one here is by way of the Washington Post, but also through SF Gate, called Footage from Camera Outside Epstein's Cell Deemed Unusable. And who would have ever thunk this, right? Of course, it's so completely predictable. It begins here. At least one camera in the hallway outside the cell where authorities say registered sex offender Jeffrey Epstein hanged himself earlier this month had footage that is unusable, although other clearer footage was captured in the area, according to 3 people briefed on the evidence gathered earlier this month. And I would almost bet that the unusable footage will be the footage that we really needed, and the clearer footage will be a little bit like the 9/11 Pentagon footage that we got. There was a few little snippets of something white that blurred past a camera, but nobody really knows what the heck it was. It was not immediately clear why some video footage outside Epstein's cell is too flawed for investigators to use, or what is visible in the other usable footage. The incident is being investigated by the FBI and the Justice Department's Inspector General's office, which are attempting to determine what happened and how to assess whether any policies were violated or crimes committed. And immediately here they start going into what I consider to be a series of excuses as to what happened. The footage is considered critical to those inquiries, and the revelation of an unusable recording is yet another of the apparent failures inside the MCC, the short-staffed Bureau of Prisons facility in downtown Manhattan. So we have here that it's short-staffed, that the people are overworked, but those basically just boil down to excuses. Prosecutors have since moved to drop the charges against Epstein, although they continue to investigate those who might have conspired with him. A federal judge has scheduled a hearing for Tuesday, that would be today, to consider the matter, and has indicated that those who say Epstein victimized them will be allowed to speak in court. And we will get to an article on that in just a moment. It says here Epstein should have been checked on every 30 minutes in the jail's Special Housing Unit, or SHU, though it had been several hours since the last check when he was discovered as staff members delivered breakfast. Investigators are exploring whether logs were falsified to indicate that checks had occurred when they had not, a person familiar with the matter said. It is almost completely unbelievable to me that multiple people were doing the exact same thing. Continues here, the 2 officers on duty when Epstein apparently hanged himself were both working overtime. One forced, the other voluntarily. Now, you can't actually force anyone to work overtime. I mean, I guess you can make various types of threats that you may lose your position or whatever, but that's not actual force. I mean, force would be, having a gun pointed at you and being threatened. The other voluntarily, officials have said. One did not normally work as a corrections officer, so nobody knows who in the world this person was, though he had in the past and was allowed to do so, officials have said. And we still do not have a straight story on this. I hear so many people saying, well, he attempted suicide one time before, but we still don't actually know what happened. Most people seem to be taking the word of the attorney for the police officer, the accused quadruple homicide guy, Tartaglione, of doing this. It says here Epstein was also supposed to have a roommate after a July 23rd incident in which he was found on the floor of his cell with marks on his neck. Authorities suspected he had attempted suicide. Epstein said he believed he had been attacked. Well, now, what in the world? He believed he had been attacked? How could he not know? What kind of phrasing is this? This makes no sense. Either someone attacked you or they didn't. This is not a matter of belief or conjecture. But it just shows how little we actually know about this case, and then how much people run around thinking that they know. We don't know. And then we'll come down here to the end of it. It says, quote, the defense team fully intends to conduct its own independent and complete investigation into the circumstances and cause of Mr. Epstein's death, including, if necessary, legal action to view the pivotal videos, if they exist as they should, of the area proximate to Mr. Epstein's cell during the time period leading to his death. The lawyer said in an August 16 statement, we are not satisfied with the conclusions of the medical examiner. And another thing I would point out here also is I don't really think they've had enough time yet to take this other so-called flawed video footage that we have from this camera that they said is unusable. Has this been sent to a forensics lab where they could perhaps develop the digital imagery in there and fix whatever the problem is internally? I'm going to guess that has not actually been done yet. I bet the legal team will look into doing something like that, though, but they have to get access to it first. Then we'll move from there to an article in The Sun, which tends to sort of, sensationalize their headlines and the body of their work in a similar fashion to how the Daily Mail does it. But it's not entirely inaccurate. It's just a little bit of extra spice is added to the soup. Headline, highly suspicious. Jeffrey Epstein was murdered, claims victim's lawyer after receiving new information from prison source, by Emma Perry. And I have heard from other sources that Emma Perry is a reliable reporter, which is very hard to come by these days. A lawyer for Jeffrey Epstein's victim says he has obtained new information that suggests the billionaire pedo did not commit suicide but was murdered. Spencer Coven, who accurately predicted that shamed financier would not last until his trial, told Sun Online he had been contacted by an anonymous prison worker who claimed it was, quote, highly unlikely the perv killed himself. The prison source told Coven every square inch of the cells where Epstein was kept was covered by CCTV, so there should have been a comprehensive video account of exactly what happened to Epstein. But as we just saw, one of the cameras supposedly malfunctioned in some manner. Who knows what's going on with that? Coven said, quote, I received a call from a supervisor at the MCC, which is the jail that Mr. Epstein was held. The first words out of his mouth, to be honest, were, quote, don't believe what you are hearing in regards to Epstein's death. I had a lengthy conversation with him about the issue of security within the MCC, and he gave me a fairly detailed description of the interior of the jail, which led me to believe that he was credible. He told me how the SHU, or special housing unit where Mr. Epstein was kept, was basically designed to be a jail within a jail. He goes on to point out here that every square inch of the place is covered by cameras. It was designed that way because of super high-value targets that are kept there, such as terrorists, drug dealers, and other extremely high-value targets, or suspects like Mr. Epstein. And of course, as we've heard from other sources, no one else in there was capable of pulling off either a homicide or a suicide in these areas. A little bit further down, he says, what my source found very suspicious was that his cellmate was pulled the day before. And that's a thing that you sometimes see in cases like this where ordinary checks and balances just fall by the wayside magically right before some terrible event takes place. And this event is terrible, of course, not for Epstein, but for justice for the victims, because that's the main thing I think so many of us feel that we are being cheated out of here. We want to have the rest of the information that was inside of his despicable noggin. The purpose of a cellmate for someone who either was on suicide watch or is on suicide watch is to notify guards if something is happening. So the fact that they pulled the cellmate is not only one level above negligent, it also appears intentional. A bit further down, it says here, Coven, who has met Epstein on 3 different occasions, says that he cannot imagine him having the resolve or the bravery to commit such an act. I met the man on 3 separate occasions, and he never seemed to me to be a remorseful individual. And we know that is the case, too, from the New York Times article that I covered. You can go back in my stream here and find that one where he was completely unrepentant to the New York Times reporter. He was just very upfront that his preference was to rape young girls, period. End of story. He always seemed highly intelligent, arrogant, self-assured, confident. Never thought he did anything wrong, even in light of all the evidence against him. He basically just blamed the victims and had an incredible ego about himself, and someone with that type of ego just never struck me as someone that could possibly commit suicide. Exactly. And other people have said that he really thought there were several different legal options for him to get off on this case. It says here from this source, I think the most likely scenario, if it was not suicide, is that somebody on the inside of the prison was paid essentially to make it look like a suicide, and the guards were paid to disappear and not be there, and his cellmate was taken away on Friday so there'd be no witness. And now you have a malfunction camera as well. And further down still here, I'll skip ahead, it says, I think the most likely scenario, if it is not suicide, as I've said before, is that there were too many people that were afraid that he would talk about what he may have done with them and others. And then we see his madam, his cohort here, Ghislaine Maxwell, as I've heard the pronunciation is to be correct. I think she should be highly concerned. And of course, Maxwell has always denied any wrongdoing. And now we'll move from there to the third article, also from The Sun. Lives in Ruins. Jeffrey Epstein victim Virginia Roberts describes how disgraced millionaire stole my dreams as dozens of women relive rapes and sex assaults in emotional hearing. But I do see a lot of suspicious stuff about this so far, especially in terms of the legal representation. I do not trust this person at all. This is a Clinton attorney. This guy is highly, highly, highly scheming and a nasty, nasty person. He is a complete snake in the grass. It begins here. Alleged victims of Jeffrey Epstein, including sex slave Virginia Roberts, describe how the depraved pedo ruined their lives at an emotional court hearing in New York court today. The brave women branded the financier a coward less than 3 weeks after he killed himself while awaiting trial for sex trafficking charges. And the other person here implied he was a coward as well. We come down here to another snake in the grass attorney. I also do not trust Gloria Allred, although she has done some good things for female victims in the past. She is also a very shady individual who's very, very, very political, heavily left-leaning, big time into the Democratic Party, just as his boy is here. These two are complete, total left-wing DNC hacks right here. U.S. District Judge Richard Berman ordered prosecutors and defense lawyers to appear in court after the Manhattan U.S. Attorney's Office said it wanted to dismiss the indictment against the financier after his death. Well, you actually have to dismiss the indictment because you cannot prosecute a corpse, if he is indeed a corpse. Of course, there's lots of questions still out there, but we'll probably never know the truth about those things. There'll probably be these Elvis-type sightings later on, the Tupac Shakur sightings, the Steve Jobs sightings that just recently happened. I was actually quite amazed by how much the Steve Jobs looked like Steve Jobs from the side from that photo that came out just, I think, a couple of days ago. Alleged sex slave Virginia Roberts said, "My hopes were quickly dashed and my dreams were stolen." She alleges that Epstein's former girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, helped the shamed banker carry out the abuse. Ms. Roberts continued, "I am a victim of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and the dark and cruel criminal acts they committed against me for years and years and years unstopped." She also alleges to have slept with Prince Andrew 3 times at various properties belonging to Epstein, claims the Duke of York vehemently denies. She also alleges to have slept with Prince Andrew 3 times at various properties belonging to Epstein. Of course, Prince Andrew has tried to play dumb, but that's not lining up with the visual and video photographic evidence that we have developed so far, nor does it align with the flight manifests. And of course, this would not be the first member of the royal family to be associated with a massive, monstrous pedophile, as Jimmy Savile was tied up in the royals on many occasions in many, many, many different ways. One of Epstein's accusers, Courtney Wild, said the banker was a coward and she feels very angry and sad that he died before going to trial. She said, "I feel very angry and sad that justice has never been served in this case. I will not let him win in death," another woman, Shantae Davis, told the court. Davies said she was hired by Epstein to give massages and alleges the financier raped her the 3rd or 4th time they met on his private island and continued to abuse her. And that's one of the things I think that stands out commonly with these cases. These abusers like Epstein don't seem to always do that on the very first occasion that they meet someone. That's usually a little bit down the road once they have sort of softened them up a little bit and gotten them indoctrinated into what is going on. Another woman who chose not to give her name said Epstein's death must be investigated. Quote, "We do need to know how he died. It felt like a whole new trauma. It didn't feel good to wake up that morning and find that he allegedly committed suicide," she said, holding back tears. During the hearing, attorney Brad Edwards, who represents some of the alleged victims, said, "I have in the courtroom today 15 victims I represent and have represented over the years. There are at least 20 more who didn't make this hearing today." Edwards said that Epstein's untimely death was curious, adding, "More so it makes it absolutely impossible for the victims to ever get their day in court that they wanted and to get full justice. That can now never happen." Edwards said Epstein's untimely death was curious, adding, "More so it makes it absolutely impossible for the victims to ever get the day in court that they wanted and to get full justice. That now can never happen." At the hearing, Assistant U.S. Attorney Maureen Comey, that would be one James Comey's daughter, by the way, so another DNC hack is set up in this case. The whole thing just stinks to me with all these DNC hacks involved. All of the attorneys, all of the prosecutors here. This is just not a good sign. If I were some of these poor victims, I would be very, very, very concerned about this situation right here. said the law required the dismissal of the case in light of Epstein's death, but said the government's investigation was ongoing. And if you'll remember, too, when they had the big pussy hat anti-Trump thing in Washington, D.C., that Comey, the daughter here, and the mom were both involved in that march wearing the pussy hats. And Epstein, of course, was a big-time DNC donor. He donated something like Epstein donated hundreds of thousands of dollars more to Democrats than he ever did to any Republicans. His Republican donations were tiny. They were minuscule. And then we move from there to the final article, also in The Sun, Monster Madam. Jeffrey Epstein's Madam, Ghislaine Maxwell, sexually abused two sisters and threatened to kill them if they exposed abuse. And these are some rather extraordinary charges indeed that must be followed up on. This must be investigated. Jeffrey Epstein's ex-girlfriend is alleged to have sexually abused two sisters while working to recruit young girls for the pedophile billionaire's sex ring. Ghislaine Maxwell has long been known to be a former partner and associate of Epstein, who killed himself earlier this month while awaiting trial on charges of sex trafficking. The British socialite has also featured in numerous accounts given by Epstein's victims, cast as an aggressive assistant who would allegedly scout for and offer help to vulnerable youngsters. Now, we must never forget that this British socialite, Ghislaine Maxwell, was the daughter of Robert Maxwell, a super spy with associations with Mossad and MI6. She has now been accused of violently groping Maria Farmer, who was 25 when she met Maxwell and Epstein in 1996, as well as her sister Annie, who was just 16. Maxwell has, of course, always denied any wrongdoing. She says that she was introduced to Epstein's odd life, often seeing young women passing through for what Maxwell described as modeling auditions for lingerie retailer Victoria's Secret. Farmer says Maxwell was a reassuring presence to young women in the company of the powerful financier, but that she would often leave his house saying that she had to go get girls for Jeffrey and were referred to recruits as nubiles. That's another thing, too, that you'll notice in these sex trafficking rings or sex trafficking networks is they have nicknames for the victims. Quote, they had a driver and he would be driving along and Ghislaine would say, "Get that girl," said Farmer, and they'd stop and she'd run out and get the girl and talk to her. Maria says the pair also became interested in her 16-year-old sister, Annie, offering to help her while she was applying for university places. Annie alleges multiple occasions on which Epstein began groping her while the group were watching films, and that one morning he came into her room and got into bed with her, saying that he wanted to cuddle. And she goes on to describe inappropriate touching by Maxwell also. She talks about a particular incident where things got quite out of control and then she left. She alleges later she received phone calls from Maxwell threatening to burn all her art and telling her her career was over. Maria filed a report with the New York Police Department about the alleged Ohio assault and the stolen art, but was referred to other agencies, including the FBI, because the incident had taken place in a different jurisdiction. In 2003, the sisters gave an interview about their experience to Vanity Fair. The magazine didn't publish the quotes, but word about the interview got out, and Maria alleges that Maxwell began calling her on one occasion, telling her, quote, "Better be careful and watch your back." She continues the quote here, "I know you go to the West Side Highway all the time. While you're out there, just be really careful because there are a lot of ways to die there." That is a rather overt death threat, and that needs to be followed up on. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you.